He was gallant as always, and in the woman's eyes one could see love for her child, despite the fact that he was such an adult. She was pleased to receive such a gift, because these were her favorite flowers, and the brunette did not forget about it. The lady complained that he had not come for a long time. Calling the man a naughty child, she expressed her dissatisfaction with him, because her mother was so bored. He was sorry that things had turned out this way, and the woman, crying and hugging the brunette, said that she was constantly worried about him. Hugging his mother back, he realized that he could not come more often, and she, clinging tighter to her son, complained that she was lonely without him. But there were more compelling reasons not to come to this house. After all, he still smelled here the smell of the girl he loved, as it seemed to him, until now. He caught himself thinking that when he knocked on the door, it would not be his mother who would open it, but she. Illuminating him with a smile, she will say that she is glad for his arrival, because she was waiting. The brunette tried in vain to forget the girl all these years. Her face, hands and lips, cheerful laughter. But it was all in vain. Taking Suli, he hurried home. As always, leaving with a heavy heart, the man wanted to cover the wounds in his soul but did not know with whom. And only the incessantly chirping beauty, his favorite girl, tried to cheer him up. But then, tired, she began to yawn. Looking around, Henman suggested that she sleep, and she, noticing tears on his face, did not understand what was happening. Her mood worsened, because she had never seen her father upset and even in tears. The baby loved him endlessly, and could not look at it. She wanted to understand whether it was her fault that her father was so upset. Unable to bear it, the brunette stopped the car. Turning in her direction, he asked the girl to come closer and look at him closer. Touching his face with her little hands, the little girl made sure that everything was all right with her father. Looking carefully at her dad, the girl said that she should be the one crying. But the man did not understand why she should do this. Pressing her hand to his face, he peered into the favorite features of the little beauty. It seemed that nothing could be hidden from her. Putting his face on the back of the seat and looking at the excited girl, the editor-in-chief sighed heavily. When will this end, he thought. And Suli, shuddering from his emotions, froze in her chair. But a second later, crying with her father, she asked him to calm down. The man, looking tenderly at the beautiful creature, calmed down, saying that she was not the reason for his tears. And a minute later, he already agreed with his daughter that they would no longer be upset. Smiling, the man waited for her consent, and the girl quickly agreed and nodded in response. How similar she was to her mother, the man thought, just as beautiful and kind. With Suli in his arms, the brunette was already entering his apartment. Having forgotten to buy milk and donuts, he listened to lectures from his red-haired friend, who understood that Henman was not at all suited to housekeeping. With his brow furrowed and his arms crossed over his chest, Shin could not hold back his emotions. The man said that the brunette constantly grumbles, but he himself cannot buy what he asks for. But Henman, looking at his friend, asked to speak more quietly, because little Suli was falling asleep, and he did not want to disturb her. Clinging tightly to her father and feeling his warmth, she slept soundly, not paying attention to Shin's intonation. He carefully and gently took the girl from the brunette, and a minute later she was sleeping sweetly in her crib. Taking out glasses from the kitchen cabinet, the doctor offered Hyunmin, who had come out of the shower, a drink. Drying his head with a towel and looking at the doctor, he could finally relax and talk. Sitting down at the table with snacks and alcohol, the brunette jokingly said that he was tired after helping his friend all day. And he, looking cheerfully at Henman, noticed that he didn't even buy groceries. But the next moment, the red-haired guy invited his friend to stop talking nonsense and sit down at the table. Shen saw how Henman was suffering. He understood that until he let go of his love, this would continue. But while pouring alcohol into glasses, the doctor decided to return to the conversation about the neighbor. He wondered if Hyunmin had seen her. But this figure was not interesting to him, and therefore he repeatedly answered that he was not. While the brunette drank his drink, Shen continued to talk about how she was wondering what she should call the brunette. Laughing, he again talked about how she was extremely curious. She was terribly interested in whether you were my friend or my husband, the handsome red-haired man added. Trying to sort out the roles in the game Jian envisioned, Henming was the husband and Shen the wife. That is, the brunette was an asset, and the guy was a liability, because that's how it looked, he said to the brunette, who was clearly left out of the conversation. The editor-in-chief, asking what the red-haired guy had just said, was surprised at his neighbor's insight. The brunette turned away and thought, and Shin, still not calming down, argued that he could not be a liability in her eyes. After all, this hits his self-esteem hard. During this period of time, they were from different planets. Henman, nostalgic for his first love, and Shen, paying attention to his nosy neighbor. The doctor understood that it was time to pull the sad brunette out of the abyss of memories. Henman sat, peering into the half-empty glass, and thought that not a day went by without him thinking about her. But the girl had been gone for 3 years. He hoped that time would heal the wounds, but memories, vivid and vivid, again brought him back to the past. And now the doctor only told him that if he constantly mourned her, then she would not go to better places. And the girl deserved it, Shen reminded. And the doctor wanted her to be happy in the next world. But now the brunette, clenching his fist, was thinking about whether to tell his friend about Jian or not. Meanwhile, the creaking door quietly opened, offering to welcome a beautiful creature into the company of men. Rubbing her eyes, Suli cried. Not understanding what happened, the dads were already asking questions. But she just had a bad dream, the little girl said. The guys looking at the girl did not understand what she was talking about, and she, without stopping crying, ran to Shen. Stretching out his hands to her, he invited her to sit on his lap, where she climbed with pleasure. He gently asked her to tell her what she dreamed. Did the monster really come out of the closet? The handsome red-haired guy suggested. Having calmed down and thought, the girl looked at one point, not wanting to say anything, and even Hanmin was wondering what the girl saw. After all, she was a great dreamer. She cried again, so bitterly and pitifully that the upset father wanted to quickly find out the true reason for the tears. Perhaps she had some pain, the doctor thought. But she suddenly started talking about how someone was crying and crying. Hanmin looked at the cutie carefully, understanding what she remembered. And the doctor, not knowing about this story, asked who was crying and whom she was calming. Stroking the girl's cheeks, Hyunmin said that Daddy didn't understand her correctly. After all, the brunette didn't cry, he said. Grasping the man's hand with her small hands, she tenderly looked into his eyes and asked that if he wanted, he could simply cry. He was surprised how the girl felt his inner state. So small but very attentive, the editor-in-chief was surprised. And she, without calming down, kept repeating that she tried to persuade him not to cry. Covering his face with his hands and turning to her with the words that she would drive him crazy, the brunette completely unraveled. Looking sternly at the baby, he said that he was about to start crying for real. And the daughter, opening her eyes wide, did not understand why. The reason is her, he answered, taking the baby by the tiny hand. But she didn't do anything. The little one was indignant. Not because of what you did, the father reasoned, but because you have the kindest heart in the world. The doctor, who was observing them, could not understand what game Henmin and Suli were playing. Meanwhile, Zhuang, entering the huge hall of the podium, slowly approached the turnstiles, when suddenly someone called her by name. Out of surprise, the girl stopped and looked back at such a familiar but already forgotten voice. But the one she saw not only surprised her, but even angered her. Calling the man the editor had been dating for 5 years a moron, she wanted to run away. But the young man quickly headed towards the editor. Grabbing the girl by the shoulders, he tried to figure out a relationship that had not existed for more than 3 months. She was angry. Angrily hissing at the guy and reminding him that they had nothing to talk about, Zhuang tore his hand away from her body. Breaking free from the young man's shackles, Zhuang began to run. But he was quick and strong, grabbing the brown-haired woman again. But this time by the hand, he was not going to part with her so easily, because she constantly avoided him and did not answer phone calls. She felt sick and disgusted. She didn't understand how she could have missed it over the years. The editor clenched her hand into a fist and warned him that this was harassment. But he laughed when he heard this word. She didn't ask him to come here, the brown-haired woman added, and even more so to grab her. And he was outraged that Jin did not want to react to him, and this forced the guy to look for a meeting with her. It was beyond her strength. What kind of nonsense was he talking about, the girl thought, and what does the man with whom everything is over want from her? Snatching her hand from the iron vise, the brown-haired girl no longer knew how to get rid of her annoying ex. Emotionally shouting her name, he called to listen. But the editor didn't want to talk. Looking into the guy's eyes, she asked him a question about why she really looked so pathetic. Yes, she didn't ask or say anything when he cheated on her. She looked like a brown-haired woman. But did the man really think, she added, that after he did this to her, the girl would welcome him with open arms? Gradually calming down, she told herself that she should not lose her dignity in front of such a non-entity. Turning around, Zhuang left, advising him to leave the building before she informed the security. But he didn't seem to hear her. He grabbed her hand and held her tightly. Jin no longer knew what to do, but help came from where she least expected it. With the words that he warned the annoying guy, the editor-in-chief was already freeing the girl's hand from the rough embrace. Without letting go of the guy's hand, Henman reminded him to think before he calls his fiancée next time. And his opponent, groaning, asked him to let go of his hand. Looking tenderly at the editor, the brunette saw her reaction. It seemed to him that his feelings were reflected in the girl's eyes. Winking at the brown-haired girl and involving her in the game he had invented, he knew how to end the conflict. And Jian, trusting him, observed how skillfully and professionally he knew how to unleash conflicts. Looking menacingly at her former lover, the editor-in-chief threatened to break his hand. And the guy, trying to finally find out everything, hurried to turn to Jian. He didn't understand how she got a fiancé in 3 months. And the brown-haired woman, pointing her finger at him, accused the man that even though they had been together for 5 years, he still cheated on her. Therefore, the time period has nothing to do with it. But Hanmin tried to stop these useless dialogues. Taking John by the hand, he was about to leave. In parting, looking at the upset guy with a malicious smile, the editor-in-chief thanked him for helping him a lot. If it weren't for him, Henming would never have met Jian. Calling the brown-haired girl affectionate words, he looked tenderly at the blushing beauty. Continuing to talk with the editor, he did not advise continuing mutual communication with the young man. After all, from the outside one might think that they are somehow connected. And in order to finally finish off the self-confident, impudent man, Henman said that he was not even a man for him, to which the offended guy began to threaten. But the editor-in-chief only looked at him contemptuously. Holding John tightly to him, he reasoned that he could not stand frivolous people. After all, the girl didn't think that she came to work solely for fun. He had to go. And realizing that he was wasting his time, he reminded him that he was not being paid for this. And communicating with cretins is only more expensive for yourself, he added, leaving the guy in painful guesses. But looking back, he wanted to humiliate his opponent even more. Noticing that he dealt only with normal people and not with pathetic freaks, he left. Turning to face the excited Jian, the editor-in-chief, acting out a drama with elements of love, admired her. But this did not last long, since the ex-boyfriend did not agree with this turn of events. By sharply grabbing Hanmin by the shoulder, he made it clear that he had not said everything. And the frightened brown-haired woman, realizing that she had involved the man in a terrible story, felt guilty. But the brunette, removing the boor's hand, said that he should not spoil his reputation or he would regret it. But realizing that the latter's reaction was still inadequate, the editor-in-chief decided to once again explain, as he put it, for the stupid. The editor-in-chief approached the guy. Leaning sharply towards his ear, he quietly hissed in letters for him to disappear. After which, taking the girl by the hand, he headed to the elevator. And she, looking back, saw off her treacherous love into oblivion. She remembered their crossed arms in Paris, but now she wanted to break free. And Hanmin asked not to break free, but rather to hold on tightly to him. The editor-in-chief had no doubt that the offended guy was looking after them. Entering the elevator, John sighed heavily. Freeing her hand, she hurried to thank him for resolving the situation very quickly. But looking excitedly at the editor-in-chief, the brown-haired woman hurried to say that next time, she would sort everything out herself. And the brunette, in a playful voice, said that he did not do it for her sake. The brunette just wanted to drink for free. She looked at him in surprise, but the brunette repeated that he wanted her to invite him for a drink. Leaning towards her face, he quietly and seductively asked why she was refusing or pretending. After all, then in Paris, Jian invited a man completely unfamiliar to her for a drink, and then she ran away, he reminded with annoyance. And the editor, blushing and covering her eyes, did not understand why he was reminding her about this again. She didn't like this conversation. The girl wanted to get out of the elevator as quickly as possible, repeating again that she didn't run away and asked to end there. But Hyunmin was persistent. Unlike that night, he himself wanted to choose the place where they could drink, and she didn't care at all. Then the editor-in-chief suggested meeting after work at a gay bar nearby. Opening her eyes wide, the girl froze. But why such a choice? She asked. But it looks like he had an answer for everything. As it turned out, this was one of those places where he could do whatever he wanted, he answered cheerfully. Not understanding what he was talking about, the editor, wrapping her arms around herself, hurried to ask a question. Jian did not understand what the editor-in-chief was going to do with her, but he was already calming her down. He simply explained that in a gay bar, a man can allow himself to cry and generally do whatever his heart desires. At that moment, the brown-haired girl was already starting to be afraid of him. Looking at the man in confusion, she did not understand what was happening. Why was he going to cry? And she had to be a witness to this event. Yes, it looked strange. A strong and smart man, and at the same time vulnerable and sentimental, the brunette thought. But the one who loved and experienced the best, as it seemed to him, moments of life had the right to this. No, of course you don't have to cry. He just liked to be invisible, the editor-in-chief stated. The idea of spending time in such a place did not please the brown-haired woman. He communicated that in this place, he could be himself. Realizing that she could not avoid the invitation, she agreed, already perceiving this as some kind of experience. Saying goodbye until the evening, Hyunmin reminded her of the meeting at 8:30, but after thinking, he changed the time to 8 hours. Jeon, realizing that she would have to explain her departure to her colleagues, hurried to ask why she was alone, but the editor-in-chief, without hesitation, answered that they were going to drink, period. Looking at the back of the man leaving the elevator, she clarified how fair this was to others. Looking around, he answered in French. Translated, this meant that it was not fair at all, but he didn't care much about that. A huge but cozy hall, the color of passion, greeted them, and the hospitable bartender offered to take the reserved table. He is tall and stylish, in a checkered coat, and she, just an editor who is not at the peak of fashion, walked inside. Jeon immediately noticed that the men were staring at her. Rising on tiptoe, she quietly told the brunette about this. He smiled and asked not to pay attention. She didn't understand why, and he explained with a grin that because of her, men could not approach him. She had no doubt that he was a narcissist. Well, of course, how could she be noticed in his shadow, the girl reasoned. What happened next looked funny and unpleasant at the same time. Several men, looking with interest at the strange couple, did not understand how to act. Having sat down at the bar and ordered alcohol, she hastened to ask a question about how often the editor-in-chief visits this kind of establishment. And he calmly, without any embarrassment, answered that a couple of times a year. This answer seemed strange, but he explained that he is in this state twice a year. Zhuang didn't yet understand what he was talking about, but she hoped that she would figure it out. Resting her chin in her hand, the brown-haired woman looked at her interlocutor with a smile. She asked whether he noticed or not what was the difference between this meeting and the one in Paris. After all, today the brunette answered all her questions honestly and without hesitation. Perhaps such an atmosphere contributed to frankness. Unlike Paris, where all questions ended with one expression. No comment was his only answer. The memories again made the man upset. These days only alcohol and an interlocutor helped him. Sitting next to a gentle and beautiful girl, he thought about the birthday of the one he would never see again. He noticed that the day before her holiday, he was not himself. Taking a sip of the drink, the brunette realized that his heart and mind were leaving him. The man felt completely empty, as if an invisible program was controlling his emotions. Looking at the editor-in-chief, Jeon realized that not everything was in order, and he thought that he needed to pretend that everything was fine and hide the pain. But alcohol, when it began to act, alleviated mental suffering. Hyunmin felt that the overwhelming depression was receding, and the curious editor, plucking up the courage, asked him whether he had friends or not. Looking reproachfully at the girl, he noted that back in Paris he realized that the brown-haired girl liked to ask awkward questions. Why did she decide that he had no friends? Hyunmin hastened to clarify. But the girl said that he misunderstood her. With her hands folded and her chin resting on them, Jeon reasoned. It seemed to her that people usually share their emotions with loved ones. So the brown-haired girl tried to understand what she was doing in the bar. Tightly clutching the half-empty glass, the brunette noted with grief that the girl did not know why he was like this today. But having cheered up and looking tenderly at Jeon, he uttered words that his companion had never expected to hear. He felt comfortable with her, he noted. The girl, peering into his eyes, finally noticed that he could be normal when he wanted. And it seemed to her drunken brain that he was smiling more often today, and this made her very happy. Her hand automatically touched the man's cheek. A warm and gentle palm slid over the clean-shaven skin and made the man shudder. Turning his beautiful eyes in her direction, the brunette was interested in whether she was drunk or not. It was déjà vu. Gently wrapping his hand in his own, he leaned closer to the girl. Smiling and addressing her formally, he asserted that today the editor-in-chief did not intend to do anything with her. With a sly smile, looking at the girl with whom he spent the night in Paris, he reminded that he had not forgotten anything. And she, laughing, said that he probably remembers that she ran away, because this fact was becoming a legend. He enjoyed her touch. Jeon was the one with whom he, without expecting it, found solace on this sad day for memories. Yes, she did not refuse that she seduced him in Paris. She really wanted to numb the pain of breaking up with her boyfriend and how she was fooled on the embankment. But now the editor simply wanted, in a human way, to support and console the brunette who was invading her life. But her presence really calmed him, he noted, although she did not know the true reason for his worries. Jeon was overcome with a surge of compassion, not knowing why, but it seemed to her that Hyunmin needed her now, and he felt such a warm, long-forgotten feeling, squeezing her small palm in his hand, enjoying the warmth. There was something surprisingly familiar to him about this care and tenderness, It felt like Suli was nearby. A wave of warmth developing inside filled the void that had lived in him for years. Suddenly, unexpectedly for himself, he gently pressed her hand to his lips, closing his eyes in pleasure. And John felt slightly embarrassed in response. Opening his eyes, the editor-in-chief noticed that they do this in Europe. In Europe, the brown-haired woman said quietly, blushing and feeling the inner warmth developing inside her body. Without taking his lips off her hand, he said that people do this as a sign of gratitude. This moment was so intimate that words were unnecessary. Hyunmin felt that his life had already changed with the arrival of this fragile girl. Is life still capable of giving moments of happiness, even when everything is already lost? The alarm clock persistently greeted the coming morning and hurried to inform its owner that new things and projects awaited her. Buried in the pillow, Jian could not raise her head. It seemed that the night had passed her by. Feeling tired, she looked at the time with regret. The brown-haired girl wanted to stay at home, but it was time to go to work. For a minute, abstracting herself from her state, the editor remembered Henman. I wonder how he got home, the girl thought. After all, the night before, his stupid and funny question before departure plunged her into a stupor. Leaving the cafe and getting into a taxi, he asked if she would really like to go to him. It was impossible to imagine a stupider question, but what could you expect from a drunken boss? The girl, stepping back half a step, said that no, it seemed to him. Looking out the car window, she wanted to add something, but his strange behavior discouraged any desire. The editor-in-chief was terribly drunk. But today, leaving the apartment and remembering that situation, the girl tried to justify Hyunmin. He probably wanted to rest, the editor thought, and my head kept hurting, reminding me that there was too much alcohol. But the friendly voice of the handsome red-haired man was in a hurry to stop her in the hall. The young man, with a charming smile and a baby in his arms, was clearly happy with John. Calling the guy the deputy director of the clinic, the brown-haired woman greeted him back. But she also didn't forget to greet Suli affectionately. But the guy didn't want her to address her formally, demanding that she call him by name. Having asked Suli to say hello to the girl, whom he called Little Sister, his goal was for the girl to make friends with the brown-haired girl. But the little girl, clearly in no mood, turned away from Zhuang with a pout. Looking at his daughter, he noted that she was often not friendly in the morning. The editor understood her, especially this morning. At the same time, entering the elevator, the girl wondered where his boyfriend was. But having corrected herself, remembering the previous conversation, she clarified that she was a friend. Without hiding the circumstances, the doctor said that he had drunk too much the night before, and was now sleeping it off. Covering her mouth with her hands, the brown-haired woman laughed. She understood that he would be late for work, although she herself did not want to go to it at all. What a coincidence, Jian thought. The doctor agreed with her. And to her subsequent question why he didn't wake him up, he answered that he didn't interfere in his affairs. A strange family, the girl thought, but she only said that they were still that couple. But what the editor heard the next moment made her turn around and look carefully at the guy. After all, he was angry that Jian called them that. The girl now did not understand anything at all, and her cracking head refused to serve as an assistant. And Shen reminded her that they had already discussed this, and again he asked not to call them a couple anymore. Coming out of the elevator, the guy kindly offered to give her a ride to work, but she, thanks, refused. After all, her car was parked in the parking lot. Smiling sweetly and leaving him with her trail of perfume as a souvenir, John hurried to her car. When leaving the parking lot, she looked back and, wanting to be careful on the road, said goodbye, looking tenderly at Suli. Looking longingly after the departed girl, he realized that his interest in her was growing stronger and stronger. He had been thinking about her since the first time he met her, and now, turning to the baby, he shyly asked permission to go on a date. It looked funny, but who else could he consult with? A huge, spacious office, with many cabinets and a huge table, was the place where the doctor could make important decisions. A talented doctor, sitting in front of the monitor screens, looked through the report. Suddenly the ringing phone, tearing him out of working order, disturbed the measured calm. It was Henman, and he was unhappy to say the least. After all, Shen didn't wake him up in the morning, and the handsome red-haired man, sincerely glad that he had woken up, greeted his friend. To which the voice from the phone, without reciprocating, nervously asked the question of why the man did not wake him up on time. Taking the mouse in his hands and moving it across the screen, he continued to work. Calmly answering Henman's question, he said that he didn't even make such attempts, realizing that he wouldn't wake up anyway. But Hanman had already asked when he finished working. The doctor did not understand why the brunette needed such information. But the editor-in-chief insisted that he come early. As it turned out later, his friend wanted to kill him for such an irresponsible attitude. Realizing that the conversation would end in a scandal, the doctor, citing being busy, said goodbye until the evening. He put the phone down and thought about it. It seems his friend woke up and was feeling bad. But why does he do this every time? The man thought. This day was like a barrier between Hyunmin's past and present. And the date that the doctor noted on the calendar was highlighted with a red circle from year to year. A new day for Hyunmin began with a discussion of a serious project. After all, the grandiose event dedicated to the silver anniversary of Podium magazine was supposed to take place at the highest level. A work colleague monitoring the project already said that famous brands wanted to cooperate with them. She was in a hurry to select a couple, and the cheerful Lee, addressing those present, reported that he was cooperating with several companies regarding schedule and cost. But the next moment, the emotional guy switching to another topic and announcing the news was already in a hurry to share it with interested colleagues. As it turned out, he discovered that the editor-in-chief was the son of the company president. Worried, Zhuang reasoned that it was now clear why he left his previous job. Most likely he would become the new president. But the opened glass door was already letting a man into the room who was supposed to be present at the meeting. But it seems that no one was waiting for him. The guy, carried away by his reasoning, continued to present information. And the colleagues sitting next to him looked with fear at the man who stood behind him. If the editor-in-chief's mother had not held such a position, the upstart continued, then he certainly would not have been so arrogant. Being in the spotlight, he did not understand the gestures that his colleagues sent him. He believed that the brunette who won the lucky ticket in this life was not only talented and handsome, but also rich, thanks to his mother. Saying that this was too much for one person, he looked at Jian. But the girl, already officially addressing him, tried to stop this verbal fountain. But, as it turned out, he did not finish. And although her colleagues, trying to save the guy from himself, raised topical, personal topics, he still couldn't stop. Interrupting them, he was about to add a couple more barbs to Hyunmin when he heard a voice behind him. Realizing that he was embarrassed again thanks to his long tongue, he swore. But the editor-in-chief, at that moment squinting at the guy, said that he was ready to listen to everything that he thought about him. So the guy thinks that his mother is the president of the podium, he clarified, looking cheerfully at the frightened guy. Because of Lee Quebec, everyone knew his secret, he added, although the brunette himself had just found out about it. Raising his hand to the guy's face, the editor-in-chief simulated the situation he was describing. So Lee thought that he could burst into the president's office and call her mom, the brunette asked. The young man, embarrassedly making excuses, already regretted that he had been unrestrained. But the editor-in-chief, straightening his shirt collar, reminded the insolent man that he could say anything behind his back, and had the right to do so. But Hyunmin asked the blushing Lee not to forget about his responsibilities to the company. It looked like an exemplary punishment that was done professionally. Glancing at John, who was watching the unusual situation with bated breath, the brunette asked to come into his office. The expression on his face did not bode well, and realizing how much was drunk in the evening, the brown-haired woman could only imagine how the man felt. The glass door with the sign editor-in-chief in real life did not promise anything good. Moreover, the girl understood the mood of the person who owned the office. Crossing the space, she was already approaching the work table, littered with things and accessories. It was noticeable that the man leaning against the surface of the table was thinking intensely. Without turning around, he beckoned her to him with his finger. A strange sign, she thought, but did not object. Approaching him and examining the objects, the brown-haired girl did not understand what the editor-in-chief wanted from her. But the readiness to help the boss was visible in her gaze. Checking with John about how the project with the firefighters was progressing, he was convinced that everything was going according to plan. The interview should take place next Monday, the girl reported. After all, it will be held in Kay's studio, Hyunmin asked, knowing a positive answer. But the editor only confirmed his words. He was looking forward to the upcoming meeting, the man concluded. But the girl was not entirely sure of the veracity of his words. It seemed to her that he simply did not understand where to start the conversation. But not even a minute had passed before Hyunmin, forgetting about the firefighters, was already asking her to be a model for his new ideas. Putting a fur coat the color of a dusty rose on the girl, he hugged her with his arms and gazed intently into her eyes. Not understanding how to react, the brown-haired girl looked at the boss with interest, waiting for him to continue. And the man, clasping his chin in his hands, looked thoughtfully through her. At that moment he looked like an artist. The images emerging in his head were like puzzle pieces that he was trying to assemble. Reaching into the suitcase with accessories, he took out elegant earrings. The brunette thought they would be perfect for the editor. Putting earrings on her small ears, Hyunmin carefully watched the girl. and Jian, without looking away as if hypnotized, looked at him in response. He liked the girl's image. Moreover, after thinking, he said that it was beautiful. But the girl, taking the compliment personally, asked about it. Did he really say how good she was? But after a minute, Jian realized that he was delighted only with his excellent taste, and Hyunmin was in a hurry to confirm her assumptions. He talked about the image of the girl, as always, not seeing her in it. Having gotten rid of illusions and blushing, she accepted his choice. With his arms folded across his chest and leaning on the table, the man reasoned. He believed that such combinations would be quite acceptable on the December cover. Reveling in his rightness, he demanded confirmation. But Jian, realizing that she didn't really understand this, advised him to call the deputy editor-in-chief. He didn't understand why. The editor, worried, explained that usually new images for covers are coordinated with her. However, the brunette stubbornly wanted to know her opinion. Her brain did not want to accept the current situation, but clutching the notebook tightly to her chest, she assumed that perhaps the editor-in-chief was checking her. Having squeezed out that it would be nice, she lowered her eyes. But Hyunmin, changing his tone, already said that he did not offer her to go to lunch, but wanted to hear the verdict. Pulling herself together, the girl said that she didn't like it. And that's all, he clarified. No, nothing more. Without taking his eyes off her, he said that in fact the outfit was completely inappropriate. He was silent for a second, and when he continued, he spoke about Jian's old-fashionedness, thus leaving her completely speechless. Looking sideways at the editor, he reminded her that she had said earlier that he had made a good choice. So she lied, the brunette clarified. And Jian, in her defense, could only say that this is a problem for all Koreans. Well, of course, the boss noted with sarcasm, because it's a big sin to go against your superiors. And there was no one to blame for this, he thought thoughtfully, but perhaps the entire Korean society. Heading to his chair, the brunette was upset. It looks like he was writing the girl off. Leaning on the armrest, the editor-in-chief pronounced a verdict. Speaking of which, if there was an interview now, she would fail miserably. Chaotically flipping through the magazine, he claimed that he would tell the brown-haired woman to forget about becoming an editor. Placing his hand on the publication, as if taking an oath in court, he probably wanted Jian to agree with his conclusions. How could such an editor help readers? He asked the upset girl. The absence of one's own opinion is completely unacceptable in such a profession, the boss stated. Carefully observing Jian, he recommended forgetting their conversation. After all, he didn't expect anything else from her. Everything was clear to him. Hyunmin let the girl go, advising her to work on herself. And the upset brown-haired girl, as always, was surprised at how quickly he could change. She bowed and said goodbye. But the idea is that in order to scare everyone, a person like Hyunmin only needs to look piercingly and say a few words, and doing it absolutely without straining. The monotonous hum of the mixer calmed and relaxed her. She loved desserts, and today she decided to try something new. The fluffy cream delighted the novice pastry chef. She dreamed of a large and bright kitchen, equipped with modern appliances, and she was proud that she could finally afford it. And now, putting colorful macaroons into the oven to dry, she got real pleasure. The result did not take long to wait. An hour later, Jian's taste buds were delighted with the amazingly tender cakes. Having cleaned the kitchen and washed the dishes, the girl looked at her watch. It was too late, but she arrived in high spirits. Admiring the lonely month, she was glad that the weekend had arrived. And she will be able to relax, being in a calm atmosphere, alone with herself. After all, the past week has been like a roller coaster. Meanwhile, the man behind her wall, putting aside his book, was thinking about how to invite John on a date without scaring off John. Suddenly, a strange noise was heard from the children's room. Opening the door, Shen saw his daughter, who had woken up and had stuck her nose into the pillow, crying quietly. Taking the girl in his hand, he began to console her. But realizing that Dad was nearby, she cried even louder. And he, not understanding what was happening, kept trying to question her. But as soon as the girl's warm body pressed against his chest, he understood everything. Suli was very hot. She fell ill, stated for some reason the frightened father, who was also a doctor. The sound of the doorbell did not bode well. Breaking the silence, it grew stronger, but she didn't want to wake up. But apparently whoever bothered her at such a late hour really needed Jian. Opening her eyes, the girl still thought that someone had made the wrong door and was about to leave. But not this time. Reluctantly, she crawled out of bed. Approaching the door and looking through the intercom, the brown-haired woman saw her neighbor with a baby in his arms. What did he need at such a late hour? Zhuang thought, already opening the apartment door. And the excited and disheveled man, apologizing, said that his daughter was sick and asked to do him a favor. She didn't understand how she could help the doctor, but the red-haired guy had already asked for a ride to the hospital, a hospital resembling a huge, massive ship, rising in the middle of the city at night, accepting patients around the clock. She resembled a living organism, the movements in which never stopped. While examining the little patient, the doctor already confirmed the diagnosis. The girl had tonsillitis, and it was impossible to do without an IV. The father looked at the baby with pity. He could not imagine how she could translate such a procedure. But there was no other choice, and Shen apparently was not quite ready for such a test. Holding Suli tighter to himself, he quietly said that she needed her dad so much, and he could not help her. Leaving the girl in the care of the medical staff, he sat alone in the corridor, upset and thoughtful. Closing his eyes, he remembered the one who unwittingly made him a father. After all, the baby's real father ordered her to be abandoned. But the girl's mother, a strong and brave woman, did not agree with this decision. She decided to raise the child on her own. Being in the last months of pregnancy, she understood that she had enough resources to raise a girl, even without my father's participation. The only thing she was worried about was not getting a scolding from her mother. The woman was cheerful and energetic, and also had a wonderful sense of humor. But something irreparable happened. Suli's mother suddenly passed away. She was Shin's sister, and before his death, he promised her that he would raise Suli. That's how they became a family with their niece. But the voice of a loved one, calling out to the handsome red-haired man, pulled him out of difficult memories. The doctor was delighted to see Hyunmin, and he came up and inquired about the girl's condition. He quickly told him that the girl fell ill with tonsillitis, and the doctors were doing everything to help her and bring down her temperature. The editor-in-chief was clearly worried. After all, like Shen, he loved his baby very much. But looking at the doctor's hands, he didn't understand why they were shaking. There were a lot of questions. He couldn't understand how Shen got there with such hands. And the guy, without hesitation, answered that they were kindly given a ride by a neighbor who, by chance, was at home. The brunette did not understand why it was necessary to disturb the neighbors at such a late hour, when they could have waited for him. But blushing with anger, the young man reproached the editor-in-chief for not being at home all the time, and Hyunmin, not understanding what he was talking about, was perplexed. This couldn't mean that the brunette had to ask Shen for time off. At that moment, the angry doctor was beside himself. After all, the guy promised to raise the girl with him when he returned to Korea. He was angry that he was doing everything alone. After all, the doctor also works, like Hyunmin, and also gets tired. And the editor-in-chief, defiantly covering his eyes with his hands, refused to listen to all this. The moral teachings of the red-haired guy began to bore him, but he no longer stopped. On the contrary. He said that he had no choice but to ask his neighbor to give them a ride to the hospital. After all, he couldn't drive, and Hyunmin wasn't at home at that moment. Realizing that it was time to stop the heated conversation, he admitted that he was to blame. Calling himself a bastard, selfish and idiot, he wanted use. Knowing his friend, the editor-in-chief understood that it would work. And indeed, after a while the guy calmed down and calmly continued the conversation. But only about myself. Turning to his friend, he began to reason. Shen wanted to understand why he, a doctor who had seen many operations, was now afraid. Why can't he pull himself together and stop the trembling in his hands? The brunette asked. But looking at his friend, he suddenly realized that Haijun was only pretending to be okay. In fact, the passing of his sister and responsibility for his niece greatly undermined his morale. But changing the tone of his voice, the editor-in-chief asked to stop shaking, because it was just tonsillitis. Shen was starting to annoy him, and the brunette could no longer look at the tremor of his limbs, which he could not stop. Firmly grabbing the guy's hand, he once again asked him to pull himself together and relax. But the red-haired guy, looking at his friend with frightened eyes, made it clear that he could not cope with his emotions. Everything will be fine with Suli, Hyunmin assured, and they will hear her wonderful ringing laughter again. He couldn't believe that on Saturday night he would be holding hands with Shen, and not with his lover, the brunette added. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard iron cans from a machine gun falling at his feet with a piercing sound, breaking the silence of the hospital. What was happening? The man tried to understand, looking up at the one who brought them. John stood in front of them, and it didn't seem to him. Frozen in the position in which she was holding cans of energy drink, she, without taking her eyes off, looked at a couple of men. There was a question in the brunette's eyes, how the brown-haired girl found out that he was in the hospital. But it seemed that the girl, who did not expect to see Hyunmin with the red-haired guy, was completely speechless. And what was going on in her soul could not be described in words. Having come to her senses, all she could do was say his position. Men holding hands with strange reputations no longer aroused her trust. Shen spoke first. Realizing that the girl had named his position, he suspected that the two knew each other. But the brunette ahead of Shen was already asking her how he knew Miss Jian Yu. To which the red-haired handsome man calmly replied that it was their neighbor. Now it's the brunette's turn to worry. After all, he remembered what far-fetched information the girl had. After all, in the entrance hall in which they lived, an elderly lady persistently dispelled rumors that this was a gay couple, and the doctor told him about this at dinner. But the brunette advised not to pay attention to this, because in reality everything was different. But now, excited and tired men, worried about their child and holding hands, looked exactly like gays. And Jian, finally understanding what was happening, turned to the editor-in-chief. Worried and holding her chin to give confidence, she asked strange questions regarding his sexuality. Realizing that he needed to explain himself, he asked the girl to go out into the corridor. Wanting to dispel her doubts and bewilderments, the brunette was already coming up with a speech. But as soon as he started talking, she, not wanting to listen, abruptly interrupted the conversation, putting her hand forward. The man, who did not expect such courage, fell silent. And the brown-haired woman has already said that he is not obliged to explain anything to her. Nothing binds them, and a random night in Paris does not oblige you to report to her at all. Then why was she so upset? The clearly upset man wondered. Turning away from the editor-in-chief, Jian spoke bitterly about how she constantly bumps into such people. Frowning his eyebrows, the brunette did not understand what she was talking about, and asked to clarify what kind of people we were talking about. Was she angry because he was bi? The man asked. But the brown-haired woman was overcome by such a wave of emotions that she could barely cope with. Yes, Jian confirmed, because he is bi. And she was upset because she always encounters deceivers. But quickly switching gears, the brown-haired girl pulled herself together. With her hands folded in front of her chest, she looked militant. But there was a small nuance. In front of her stood an absolutely accomplished man, who, when his name was mentioned in such a tone, could not react otherwise than to stop attempts to humiliate him. Looking at the dissatisfied girl, he asked for 10 minutes to have a serious conversation with her. The best defense is an attack, he thought, looking at the irritated girl. After all, now she will begin to scold him for the fact that the brunette, while in a relationship, slept with her. Attempts to move the conversation in a different direction did not bring results. Moreover, the editor didn't even give him the opportunity to get a word in. Without stopping his attempts, he interrupted her and addressed her formally. He wondered how the girl would look into his eyes on Monday, but at that moment she didn't care. Moreover, she was not afraid to remind the boss that they were not at work if he forgot. She asked me to abstract myself from work and finally listen. He was surprised by her persistence, considering new facets of Jian's character. The brunette, having given up, agreed to listen. At that moment, her confidence irritated him. Having adopted a serious expression on her face, the brown-haired woman was already clarifying why she was angry. After all, he made her look stupid. And she, being subject to emotions, believed like a fool that he did not have a lover. She didn't care at all whether Henman thought a one-night stand was cheating or not, the brown-haired girl said. But she knew that he had been in a relationship with Shen for a long time, and they even adopted Suli. Raising the tone of her voice, the brown-haired woman said that she had already received a knife in the back. And she realizes that Hyejun is in her place now. She also believes that if she were the red-haired guy, it would be painful for her. It was almost impossible to stop her now. Letting the editor speak, he listened to the fact that having flown to Paris specifically to forget the former bastard, she stumbled upon him. And he turned out to be exactly the same. And what does the brunette think? She can be angry or not, the girl asked. Taking all her comments, he looked somehow strange. For a minute, Jian thought he was joking with her, but that didn't stop her. Patting her chest with her palm, the girl insisted that she was not angry with him because the man was bisexual. That's not the point at all, the brown-haired woman emphasized in an affirmative tone. And the fact is, after these words, he suddenly knelt down and pointed his hand at the floor, accentuating his gaze. In fact, he is here, the girl summed up. But rising from his knees and pointing his finger up, he wanted to show everyone that he was there. Above all the others, she asserted, finishing the production. Of course, Jian could not pretend, she added, that nothing happened in Paris. But if he protects Suli's feelings, then the brown-haired woman recommended not to tell Hyejun anything. And also, the editor reminded that she knows how to keep her mouth shut. So the editor-in-chief doesn't have to worry about rumors. Looking intently into the girl's eyes, he thanked her protractedly. And she, as always lately, saw slight disdain in his eyes. And since the young girl considered herself guilty before his friend, she promised for his sake to communicate normally with Henman. After these words, the girl turned sharply and wanted to leave the hospital. But the brunette, gently but persistently taking her hand, tried to talk. Smiling, he asked about how her ex-boyfriend abandoned her. Such a saint. He was completely crazy to cheat on such a decent girl, he summed up. But the brown-haired girl at that moment did not want to talk to him at all. She asked him to let go of her hand, threatening to hit Henman. Acting out a scene of fear, the man let go of her hand. Strange, but he did not understand how to hold her. The editor turned around and left. She advised the editor-in-chief to be careful, and she promised not to meet him alone again. But he couldn't let her go. Drawing the girl into the dialogue again, he asked in which country it is customary to first express everything, and then simply leave. Well, what is this? She thought. He is just a monster who holds her with some invisible threads. He really wanted to understand. The man asked ironically where she learned this. Turning around, John looked at him indignantly, and the brunette urged her to listen to the end. After all, they are raising Sully together, and the guy is just his friend, or rather a family member. And most importantly, they are heterosexuals. She really wanted to believe it. Or did the brown-haired woman want him to prove it to her? The editor-in-chief asked, approaching and looking into her beautiful eyes. She wanted to understand what else the editor-in-chief had come up with, realizing that he was capable of much. John did not understand what the man wanted to lie to her about. Taking off his jacket, the man draped it over her shoulders. The girl was dumbfounded, and Henman, touching her body, felt the brown-haired woman trembling. But not from cold, but from anger, not understanding when he would stop crossing the boundaries she had set. John was now making it clear that this did not work for her, and asked to take the jacket. And he, not intending to seduce her, just thought that she was cold. But the next moment something happened that the girl did not expect. Pointing to his watch and addressing her very formally, he said that time was up. She did not understand what time they were talking about. But having turned 180 degrees, he walked away, artistically raising his arms. With a satisfied smile, he thanked her for today and asked her to be careful while driving. Looking after the retreating boss, she did not understand why fate had prepared such a test. After all, she has not yet fully recovered from the breakup with her ex, and the aromas of fried bacon wafting through the kitchen indicated that breakfast was coming. Shen stood at the stove, and Henman, sitting at the table and leafing through the podium, was clearly in no mood. Turning around and looking at his sad friend, the handsome red-haired guy asked him if he had sorted everything out. But the brunette did not immediately understand what he was talking about, or, as always, pretended that he did not understand. Serving scrambled eggs and bacon, he recalled the ambiguous situation with his neighbor. But Hyunmin reminded him that they discussed this. Everything is not as simple as it might seem. But Shen, not understanding the difficulties involved, instructed her to go and tell her the whole truth. The editor-in-chief, who had already done this, did not understand why it was necessary to discuss this again. And the doctor did not want John to think that they were a couple, because he liked the girl. Looking at the brunette with a downcast gaze, he reminded him that he had originally asked him to tell the truth about their relationship. The editor-in-chief was nervous. Not only was John pestering him, but now Shin had joined in. How did the doctor suggest talking about their relationship, going and knocking on neighbors' doors? The brunette asked. But the exhausted man, exploding, asked the brunette not to behave like that, because he was already feeling bad. There was a smell of scandal in the air. They, realizing that it was necessary to defuse the situation, accused each other of the smallest sins. But Shen had the last word, and he once again asked Henman to explain everything to Jian. Having folded his hands, the brunette did not understand why this mattered so much, and what the doctor was trying to achieve. Having looked carefully at his friend, the editor-in-chief began to guess. But I still asked a couple of questions to clarify the situation. He was interested in the fact that the red-haired handsome man wanted the residents of the entrance, or only John Yu, to know the truth. First the brown-haired one, Shen confirmed, and then everyone else. What was going on? The brunette wondered why she insisted so much. If what Jian thinks is so important to him, then most likely he has feelings for the girl, the editor-in-chief thought. Looking at the belligerent man, he realized that he was not mistaken. But now he had something to think about. After all, they could become rivals, but he didn't want that. It is not known how this conversation would have ended, but most likely the editor-in-chief figured out this confusing story to the end. But the doorbell rang. Turning around, they didn't understand what to think about. After all, the guys didn't invite anyone, much less wait for anyone. The red-haired handsome man, quickly crossing the room, hurried to the intercom, hoping that the neighbor had come. But whoever he saw there did not please the guy at all, and even upset him. Behind the door stood a man whom the doctor feared and hated. Looking at Henman, he quietly said that this was an unpleasant surprise. After all, his brother Hebob came to visit them. It was impossible to imagine a worse company on this beautiful Sunday evening. Cursing, Henman looked at his friend dejectedly, but Hyejun, making a remark to his friend, asked not to express himself at home, because Suli could overhear. The mood was ruined, and I didn't want to see my older brother at all. The guys knew that meetings with Hebob were quite unpredictable, and now they were waiting. Being Hyejun's older brother, he had a stern disposition and communication with him could not be called pleasant. The large and tall man was the only person on earth who could influence Henman, and he, frankly speaking, was afraid of him. Opening the door, the doctor saw a dissatisfied face. A pair of eyes were looking at him, in which questions were already read. Putting a grimace of joy on his face, the doctor greeted the guest who unexpectedly fell upon them. Of course, he did not forget to ask the visitor about the reason for the visit, but it seems his question was ignored. But the doctor was already scolded for not opening the door in 10 seconds according to army rules. Warning that next time he would only have 2 seconds to do this, the lawyer, handing over the package, walked into the apartment. Affectionately calling Hyunmin a little rat, he asked why he didn't call him when he returned to Korea. He also reminded that the brunette would be punished for this unreasonable act. The editor-in-chief apologized, but it was too late. Calling him with his finger, he suggested that he choose the punishment himself. Indignant that he was no longer a child, the brunette tried to avoid punishment. But the lawyer was not interested in this. Hyunmin had no choice but to start doing push-ups. Or rather, he had another choice, for example, he was beaten. But the guy chose a more humane one. Moreover, the red-haired handsome man was obliged to control the execution of the punishment within 10 minutes. But the creaking door was already letting her into the space. Turning around, Hebob broke into a smile. On the threshold stood Suli, whom the formidable man loved endlessly like her father's. Calling her a little princess, the man was glad that the baby woke up. And the girl, rubbing her eyes, did not believe that her uncle had come to visit them. But he was already stretching out his hands to her, while Hyunmin, performing push-ups, and the doctor, monitoring the process with a stopwatch in his hand, carried out the order. The prepared dinner, fragrant with aromas, was served to the table. The fragrant pieces of bacon, surrounded by potatoes, looked so organic that they mentally made the receptors shiver. Looking at the picture of the family reunion, one could say that everyone was happy about the appearance of their brother. And Henman, who received a boost of energy, even offered to drink. Trying to keep the conversation going, the editor-in-chief asked how his wife, whom he had not seen for a year, was doing. To which the man replied that she was working, unlike such a loser as Henman. But wedging into the conversation, the doctor, realizing that Hebob did not have a very good relationship with his wife, doubted that he really knew how she was doing. Deciding to teach his younger brother a lesson for sticking his nose into someone else's business, he came up with a punishment. Moreover, he did it so quickly that the guy did not immediately understand what was happening. The lawyer asked for bacon tongs. Handing them over to his brother, he could not even think that they could become a weapon. With inherent anger, he tightly grabbed his brother's hair with it, pulling it several times. It hurt so much that Hyejun groaned, and the lawyer, saying that he could get even worse if he talked to his elders like that, continued to have lunch. But Suli, who was clearly not afraid of anyone, was already rushing to her father's aid. Knowing that hurting each other was forbidden in her family, she was belligerent. Frowning her eyebrows, she loudly shouted for her uncle to leave her father alone. The girl was so convincing that she took Hebob by surprise. Her small fists, striking the man's iron muscles, tried to reach him, stopping the cruelty. And Henman at that moment, watching the baby with tenderness and love, remembered her mother, just as brave and tender at the same time. They talked for a long time, drank and ate. They remembered their childhood and their sister, who passed away early, but gave them all a gift in the person of Sulia. And at that moment, Jian, shifting from foot to foot outside the door threshold, was embarrassed to knock on her neighbor's apartment. Her lilac long sleeve, perfectly refreshing her face, surprisingly matched the ponytail of her collected hair. The brown-haired woman wanted to treat her neighbors to macarons, of which she baked quite a lot. But now, standing at the door, she didn't understand why she was doing this. Strange thoughts about the orientation of boys again entered her head, but the girl didn't want to believe the rumors. But she, remembering the trip to the cafe, did not understand why heterosexual men go to gay bars. Carried away by her thoughts, the brown-haired woman did not notice how the door quietly opened, and the editor-in-chief came out to meet her, disheveled and dressed in home clothes, smiling. Greeting the girl, he was frankly shocked, not understanding why she was here. The boss reminded her that today was Sunday. And Jian, without taking her eyes off him, said that she just wanted to treat him with sweets. She never ceased to amaze him. And now, with this exquisite dessert that she prepared herself, the brunette thought. But the editor loved to bake, because it was her hobby. He lowered his head and thought, not understanding how to react. And it seemed to the brown-haired woman that he would never invite her to come through. Realizing that she had to leave, she said goodbye. After all, she was not welcome here. As always, the girl thought while sighing. But Henman had a different opinion on this matter. He still asked her to wait, not to leave. Inviting the brown-haired man to have lunch with them, he let the girl into the apartment. From surprise, John became agitated, but did not refuse the offer. Walking into the large living room, she stopped. Hyunmin rushes to introduce Hebob, not expecting the smiling little girl to do it faster than him. And the smiling lawyer was already extending his hand to John and introducing himself. At that moment, Hyejun's older brother looked gallant and friendly. She didn't know that the handsome red-haired guy had an older brother, and she was pleased to meet him. And the brunette clarified that the brown-haired woman also works at the podium. The man was sincerely surprised how small the world is, but the question that the big man asked struck Jian, because he was interested in how the editor-in-chief felt about her. While the brown-haired woman was working on an answer, Hebob, ahead of her, admitted that the question was indeed stupid. After all, the lawyer had known the brunette since childhood. But he advised Jian to learn from Henmin, whom he considered a professional in his field. And yes, John completely agreed with him, and cutie Hyejun was already in a hurry to treat the guest. Smiling, he handed a plate of fragrant French fries to the beauty. He wanted you to appreciate his cooking skills. But the dissatisfied brunette, finishing his portion of food, reminded his friend that Jian baked the macarons herself, if he didn't know. And this dish is much more complicated than the one prepared from a fast food bag. The handsome red-haired man was surprised. Knowing that this dessert was very popular, he wanted to try it with pleasure. But the restless editor-in-chief, trying to provoke his brother, hastened to say that the doctor once said that he did not understand how people eat macaroons. It looked funny. The confused girl, who did not quite understand their games, fell silent. In the hope of learning something new about these people, she turned into a rumor. From the conversation, she understood that the guys knew each other well. But a strange note of jealousy emanating from Hyunmin caught her. But Hebob also noticed this, because the lawyer had not seen such a competition for a long time. What is going on between them? The man thought. Periodically, while having verbal arguments, the friends glanced at John, and it became more and more unpleasant for her to be in their company. And the older brother, having joined the game, was already adding fuel to the fire. Addressing the men, he asked what these two knew about the spirit of competition. Offering Jian a glass of drink, the brunette did not understand the question asked, considering how it was possible not to know about this. But still, I decided to clarify with the lawyer what kind of rivalry was being discussed. To be honest, the editor-in-chief agreed. And the doctor, handing another portion of potatoes to the girl, did not understand why he raised this topic. But the laughing Hebob, throwing his hands behind his head and leaning back, enjoyed what he saw. He believed that they would soon understand everything anyway. The brown-haired woman, tightly clutching the glass in front of her, and looking at the big man with fear, also, apparently, did not understand what he was talking about. Pointing his finger at the young people, the lawyer said that they would soon be involved in a very interesting story. And now she didn't like everything. With her head down, the editor had been demanding the photographs be redone for several minutes. Watching the flashing pictures on the monitor, she asked to pay more attention to detail. Turning around, the photographer did not understand what Jian wanted from him. The man in the red Panama hat and big glasses was nervous, but that was nothing compared to her emotions. After all, the brown-haired woman asked that the tired faces of the firefighters in the photographs be similar to the real ones. The editor wanted to see photos of fearless people in a dangerous profession. I also hoped to show people what they look like in everyday life. There was no productive result. The photographer recalled that the presented photo set was created in honor of the Day of Fighting Fires, and therefore believed that it was necessary to show a courageous image. While he insisted on his point, for some reason believing that readers needed to find out about the causes of the fire, the working group stood idle, and the editor in charge of the project, unable to cope with her emotions, started screaming. John believed that all the news was littered with realistic photographs. She didn't understand why they were put in a fashion magazine. Requiring a modern approach, she recalled the general concept. And the man, tired of the work and persistence of the editor, asked to leave everything as it was. Everything was boiling inside. Mentally calling the man a freak and a bastard, she felt that she was powerless. Trying to find arguments to increase the motivation and performance of the team, she went through the options. But suddenly, a voice familiar to her reminded the photographer that he was being paid